hang on, Kimberly. I just, like, we've been talking, and I just decided, we said we're gonna just hit record because there's so much good stuff. As two people of African descent from different like pathways, with this intersection of neurodivergence and with our kids, like there's all these places where we've hit upon the obstacles to just being human, right? And so I just wanted to frame this since we just started recording, because I feel like whether it's through the lens of our kids and neurodivergence, our own neurodistinctiveness, or like all the pieces, so much of what you're saying about the impact of colonialism is feels so powerful and sad, and yet empowering at the same time. And many of us, we didn't get to grieve colonialism. Like, you just like, you know what, it's hit the road, right? Like you said with your mom, you just needed to cope, right? Yes. And so many of us are now in this like, oh, we have to grieve this. So anyway, decolonize work. You were talking. So if you could just recap, like what's coming with you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for context, so just to kind of recap what I was saying, and all of this comes from my course, Decolonizing Neurodivergence, and the subtitle is From Violence to Love, and I can talk about what that means in just a moment. So at the core of my theory, so I'm an academic, a researcher by training, and I think in theories. And so my own conceptual, or I say theoretical, my own conceptual model puts the worker, the treatment of the human being as a worker, at the center of the conversation. And it is because in this country, we come out being treated as workers that we form the term it gives the term neurodivergence meaning in the first place. It is because from daycare, from pre-K, from kindergarten, that there's a certain performance we have to do that we're unable to do if we're on the spectrum or if we have ADHD, because that doesn't fit the way we function, then we are considered to be neurodivergent. So there are clinical definitions of what it means to be neurodivergent and to have a specific neurodivergency. However, well, I don't know if there's clinical, but there are clinical definitions of neurodivergencies. However, there are also cultural and political definitions as well. And the definitions that we use in a clinical sense are born of these political distinctions. And this is
because there's no such thing as not being biased. Like it must be grounded in the current mainstream bias of the moment. Yep.
Right. And so all the things that we are critiqued or criticized for, there's a lot of deficit language used around neurodivergencies. And one of the examples is one of my students in my course, one of the people that was on my live yesterday called herself stubborn. And it reminded me of an exercise I had people do in my course, which is, I want you to start with a word that's been used to describe you, a negative word. And I want you to put all these words on the tangents of a circle. And I want you to walk it backwards to the center. And at the center of the circle is your identity as a worker. And I want you to walk backwards as to how you got to that word, because you did not fit what was needed to make you into an efficient worker, a machine part, a cog, or whatever, a spoke in a wheel or whatever, because you did not fit that. And so what I was saying to you before we started recording is, and this is something I actually say in my course, is I've heard teachers on TikTok and other places talk about, oh, I understand now that I met the child's parents, I understand. First of all, I think that's really shitty. Second, and abuse of power. But second of all, it makes sense. So you can look at that a couple of different ways. Number one, the family is the first system. And so the family is your connection to all these other systems. And the family does an effective job of importing the values of those other systems into you. It is a delivery system. And I think about like my own mother and growing up in an agricultural background, going to the textile mills next. And that was a big leap up for her. And there are lots of things about the way she raised me that are very troubling to me. But what I came to understand in my 40s after trying to fix her and make her a certain way and shape our relationship a certain way, she did what she was supposed to do. She was a representative of these systems. She was the conduit. She was the way that those values were imported in me. She was supposed to raise factory workers, and that's exactly what she did. She understood the assignment. She was a factory worker. She understood the assignment. The other part of this about the teachers, though, is this: they understood their assignment as well. It was determined 300-400 years ago that they would critique and criticize parents in this way. So just like there are values imported to that child through their family, there were values imported to those teachers through their families as well, which creates this foolish little game that that the problem is these people over here won't do their part. So that's why we're all like, that's why we all are in this situation. But it's a silly little game. It's also a perfect game too. Like white supremacy and capitalism is the perfectly reinforcing game that makes us think it's always somebody else because it creates all these hierarchies.
And it's a power play, and everybody knowing their place in the power hierarchy.
Yes,
so really
right.
landing. So for example, as a teacher, this idea that I have the power of, like, I don't know, higher education knowledge. I know how to educate children. I remember so many times when I would be not confrontational, but I would be with teachers saying, I am the expert on my child. You are my partner in this journey. But it took me so long to realize it was like I was Charlie Brown's teacher. They nodded when I said that, but the idea of partnership in education isn't the assignment.
It's not the assignment. And not only is it not the assignment, it's not set up to be a partnership.
Yeah,
like there's nothing, if you look at it from a user experience perspective, you set up the system according to who your most important user is. It's not set up. One of my favorite quotes is that a system is perfectly, or you get a system is set up to get the results it is perfectly designed to get. I think that's it. I always get it twisted. But the sentiment is that the system is not broken. The system is getting the results that it's set up to get. So there are achievement gaps consistently because there's supposed to be achievement gaps. And they are part of what keeps that in place. And in fact, statements like that help keep things in place. It is about a certain power dynamic that is intended to stay in place. And so this is the way that capitalism helps rebrand white supremacy, is you come up with things like test scores and achievement gaps and all that. They exist because they are supposed to exist. And so within my course, the model that I'm using talks about when you work in a public agency, you work in an organization, there are different criteria that we have to look at. And there are 4 categories of criteria. There's violence, there's service, there's care, and there's love. And I put love on there, actually deeply inspired by the work of Bell Hooks. But she talks about love not as sentimentality, but as acts, as verbs, as actions. And so
action, No, I was just saying action, absolutely. I'm just agreeing with you, yes.
And so when you tell me that you're in a system that shows love for its people, not it could be interpersonal, but I'm not really talking about interpersonal stuff, because you can be as nice as you think you are, but if I'm going hungry because I'm getting paid half of what the person sitting next to me and we're doing the exact same thing, then I don't care how nice you are. It doesn't matter to me. That's irrelevant. But when a child comes to school and you see that they need help with something, they have a need, that child does not exist in context, out of a context. The context is the family. And so if you have a child in need, you have a family in need. So an act of love on behalf of a nonprofit, or like a nonprofit or an agency, or even an individual, is to make it so they get support with the thing that the family needs, because that is a family issue. If the child needs help with reading, that is a family issue. That is a family system issue. And so, what happens in public agencies and nonprofits, churches, is we get, we really focus on the service part. Like, this is what we're mandated to do. Here are the legal obligations. Here are the financial obligations. So when we think about how the state is organized for violence, we tend to think about law enforcement. We tend to think about the military. But along that little that chart, that gradient, the state is organizes violence through the healthcare system. It organizes violence through education. It organizes violence through child services, taking people's children away and giving other people money to support the same children. It organizes violence in so many ways. And so here's the overall point. And this is something that I taught when I was teaching in academia. Um, if you want to really understand what we have going on here, look at the acts. Like, the behavior is the behavior. I don't care how you feel about me. I don't give a shit if you think I'm the nicest person in the world or you think you're the nice person. That does not matter. At the end of the day, it does not matter. And what that does is allows white people to stay in the comfort zone. I'm looking at how you treat me when I tell you that I have a need, and how you try to create this situation of deciding whether I deserve something or not. So number one, look at how you behave and what you provide. Like, are you trying to address this at a systemic level, or are you trying to look like a nice person? But then, when I look at the acts, I'm looking at the assumptions underneath the acts and pulling those apart. Do you assume that I don't deserve something? And if you assume that I don't deserve something, then why is that? So, oh, wait a minute. So I believe in the American creed of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Okay, well, where does that come from? What assumptions are underneath that? And what assumptions are underneath that? And what assumptions? Oh, we get back to the fact that you just see me as labor, and I'm black labor that can be leveraged against white labor.
I think there's so much here, and I love the conversation that comes back to the educational system, because both of us have been in, and I still am in the educational system in particular ways. But I also have kids that I have tried to offer the contrary voice to in my own shaping of them. Back to your earlier point about, earlier before we're recording, you made this comment that if you're working with middle managers without working with the CEO, then you really are setting them up for punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been a heartbreak to me. I don't regret any way in terms of how I've educated my kids, right? I
Sure.
believe in the messages I have shared with them. And I see them feel confused because they're like, so then something's wrong with mommy.
Right.
Right? So then, because the legitimate voices say a particular thing, so then it's mommy and her little strange thing. And even though mommy says, I'm smart enough, I'm good enough, are in the system that's commoditizing them. And without anybody telling them, they know it. And so that's the thing that we have to acknowledge, that is so powerful in the air and in the water that we're in. All of these systems that you've described. And so the lack of interrogation on every level, even with people who are, kind and, sweet, they've accepted the principles as right. So even this idea of having to justify my need for the things I say I want.
Right.
Well, obviously, this person is the boss. So of course you have to justify. Like, it doesn't sound like it's a power differential. It doesn't sound like violence to them.
No,
it sounds like this is perfectly normal. And I think for all of us, there is this like awakening. Which pill is it? Red pill, blue pill? I don't know. But there is this awakening that when you start to see, it's like, why do I feel like I'm the one that decides whether you need support, resources, or whatever it is that you're saying you need? How do I determine what you need?
Right. Right. Yeah, one of the ways
And
that the violence is committed is through qualification
yeah,
and through metrics, right? So we know that these standardized tests were created to show how smart white children are compared to black children. We know that that's the reason why they exist. And so the war that is waged with metrics is just amazing. And it creates this whole narrative about who deserves to get what, and who's in a worse off position, who needs our pity, who needs our sympathy. Um, but that service part, I actually got this comparison between service and care from David Brooks' Second Mountain Life. And he talks about like agencies can give you service, but they cannot necessarily give you care. It's the individuals who give you care. But the service part is definitely a prerequisite to the violence, because service is very closely tied to monitoring, to surveillance, to metrics, to quantification, and the white supremacist belief in objective realities. And you can do service and still do harm. You can do service and still you could commit, like you could follow the legal mandates. You could spend the money as allocated and appropriated, but you still could be committing violence towards people. And you come back, you have a beautiful data visualization and a picture to show for it, and it's still violent. It's still violent.
I remember the first time I felt the dichotomy of it, when I realized and it's such a small thing. I asked for speech therapy for my son, an extra session of speech. He was 5 or something, so it was a little. And they said his IEP, he doesn't qualify for an extra 30 minutes of speech, but he does qualify for a communication device. Now, I'm like, so the extra session of speech is about $100 per hour at the time. And the communication device is $4,000. And you're saying to me that I can't have for my child more speech.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how do you get to say that?
Right.
How do you? And it was this weird thing about, this is what we can give you. And then I remember, because one of my earlier business, and I serve parents of kids with special needs as well. But when a parent would be, I didn't get any of the help I was asking for until we were in such crisis.
Yes.
That then they're swooping in to offer psychiatric hold, all the medication, all the thing, and removal of the child into a facility, something that costs multiple thousands of dollars, when the thing I needed, when I needed it, was relatively inexpensive, but it would have been care to me. And I think about the similar thing in the workplace, that a worker needs an extra half an hour of break, or an extra, like whatever it is that they need. If you just actually look at it in terms of numbers, it's pretty cheap to the price organizations are paying to maintain the system that's clearly working but not producing results that are caring for humans. They're paying a price to maintain this really expensive system. It would be so much cheaper to actually meet human needs, like this extra half an hour.
If we looked at those columns, like you're talking about care that could have been provided, and even acts of love, and I'm not talking about personal joy, but I mean like instituting love, putting love in place as a default. Look at the violence that was committed because they refused to do that. So 2 things. Number 1, this country loves sick care. We don't like healthcare, and I don't mean just in a medical sense. We love sick care because we love saviorism. That's number 1. And saviors heal. Saviors save, relieve. They don't care for. That's number 1. Number 2, what was I gonna say? So I was saying, there's another conversation going on there through me off. So saviors, so we love sick care. Oh, the other thing is, I want to go back to what you were saying before we were recording. Really, what I'm talking about It's about people. It's about personhood. Because I think you even have to talk about that even before you get to the race part. The race part is a tool to ignore the personhood of all the people involved. But this goes back.
Whether we're talking about race, this neurodistinctiveness, gender, whatever the thing is, this is really about not being able to be with each other as humans.
Right.
Like,
so it's just disconnecting from each other, and it's disconnecting from yourself. So you become a part or a piece, and you can't really do that unless you're alienated and isolated from other human beings, including yourself. So the other thing is, again, disconnecting this from race and all that, although race is a very important part of this conversation. So I had to look at TikTok and look at when people try to bring things to white people's attention, and they duck and dodge, and they build these straw man arguments and these logical fallacies or whatever, because they just don't want to deal with it, period. They just don't. But here's the thing. If you live in a society where it is acceptable for you to watch recordings of Ahmaud Arbery being murdered, George Floyd being murdered on the Black trauma porn, and that is okay with you, then what that means is that you value trauma. You value trauma. So when you go to the psychologist and you go to the therapist and you try to work on your own trauma, those two things don't line up because you value trauma. Trauma is important in your life. So you're trying to get rid of it over here, but you accept it over here. That just does not work. And also, one thing I want to mention, like with the psychologist and therapist, in seeking mental health support, what we have to do is construct ourselves as the problem. And this is also for the self-help industry as well. And I knew I'm a self-improvement kind of person, but there was always something kind of seedy about it to me. And the seedy part is that it totally lacks context. It totally lacks the context in which these descriptors, these labels, this identity is created. And so it creates a loop. It creates this nasty little loop of hope and self-loathing, hope and self-loathing, hope and self-loathing. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You just need to get your shit together, hope and self-loathing. And it just keeps selling stuff, right? But for neurodivergent people and people in general, it just creates this vicious cycle in which the whole point is to remain disconnected from yourself. And because you're a worker, that's what you are. And as long as you're disconnected from yourself, you will continue to pay money for people to tell you what is wrong with you. Now, being clear that I find therapists, psychologists, people in mental health professionals very useful, but there are also a lot of people, when you go talk to them about the systemic issues that face you, they will not mumble a word about it. They will, in fact, some of them will invalidate it. They will pretend like it does not exist because their comfort is more important than providing you the support you need.
I mean, as you said, the system isn't built for partnership. So while I am the captain of my ship, whatever, it's me and my agency. That's the issue, and you are collaborating with me for my agency. But that's not really, that's what I think should be happening, but that's not really what's happening. And so, of course, defining me as the problem, all the things you're saying, maintains the saviorism is so good. Because if I'm valuing both being the savior and I'm valuing trauma, then we have the zero-sum game. There's nowhere to go, right? There is no way, there's no getting rid of. There must be taking away. There must be violence so that we can have, what we really value. So, I mean, we've touched on a lot of, I think, critical topics that everybody who's listening might need to do some, specific investigation into for themselves. I think for each of us, there's an aspect of this that's the gateway, that's the doorway in. And for me, because I sat on so many intersections of identity, and then one of my identities as mother is the place that for me, I felt like I was the gatekeeper for my kids. So then I'm like, I'm managing my stuff, and I'm also trying to create space for them. That opened the door for some of this conversation for me. But if somebody's a teacher, a social worker, one of my clients, a social worker in a critical care space, there's so many places where we're meeting upon these ideas. So if you were to give like one bit of guidance to a teacher, social worker, manager, even though we know that, yeah, we want to burn the system down, really, but we want to affect it from the points of highest influence, and yet we are on the ground. We're on the ground living this out. What would you say to a teacher or a manager or an entrepreneur who's so well-meaning, about to hire their first team, about to saying to themselves, acknowledging ADHD in their own lives, for example, and saying, I'm going to create something that's different? With, what would you say to them?
I would tell them to get clear about what decolonization means to them personally. Because if you go into this trying to fix things for other people, you're too wounded to not bleed all over other people, especially as a white person. You go in trying to be charitable. Charity is not justice. And you go in trying to make amends and trying to set this up. But what you have to do is get in touch with how these things have shaped your identity. Because you don't really know where you are in this. Because any improvement, if you want to call it that you've been encouraged to do, has to do with you and you alone. It's not about your relationship to the community. And I'm saying that this has to happen in the context of both you and the community that you relate to. So here's the thing about like the self-improvement industry. What it does is it's white supremacy rebranding. It allows you to be new and improved, but ahistorical, in that whatever happened in the past, whatever you did in the past, however you treated Black people, however you treated neurodivergent people, however you supported systems. So not interpersonal treatment, but however you've supported systems, it's irrelevant now. And there's a way that we just don't need to talk about that. No, you need to talk about it for yourself. And you need to talk about it in terms of the systems that you support. Because if you don't understand that, what you're going to do is create another saviorist situation, and you're going to recreate the very problems that exist. You're just going to rebrand white supremacy.
One of my good friends, who's also a therapist, when I was with my oldest, I was having postpartum depression, and I don't know, I just reached out and we were talking, and she said, Faith, by the time you decided that you were not going to be like your mother, you already were.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think this is the place that we all have to be at. Like, we're all swimming in the water. You already are a product and complicit in this system. So really tuning into that, so that you building that awareness, and then using that awareness. Of course, we're all going to, be imperfect and all the things. And this is not about perfection. This is just about layering in the awareness versus saying, no, that's not me. And then moving from that place to create based on the emerging awareness, knowing that it will be imperfect. Kim, thank you so much. We could go on. I loved when you said earlier, it's like, this is my theory. No, this is my conceptual framework. I'm like, this is an academic. This is me saying, I know.
Oh yeah, I am.
I was off to the races in my mind. So appreciate the level of rigor that you bring to this conversation. Really deeply connected to personal human experience. So thank you so much.